Hello, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Young Professional Council of AHLA open membership call. Today, our panel discussion is Lawyers New to Healthcare, Gaining the Edge. This is a panel discussion for young professionals and law students, and this is brought to you by the AHLA Young Professionals Council and the Insurance Payers Plans and Managed Care Practice Group. So today we have a number of panelists that are going to address some questions that we have solicited from young professional members here at AHLA through the Young Professionals Council. And today I am your moderator, Patrick Garcia. I will be moderating the call and fielding the questions to our panelists. To give you a little bit of background of my experience, I am a private healthcare attorney with the law firm of Hall, Render, Killian, Heath, and Lyman. I've been in private practice for just over 3 years, and my practice focuses on advising healthcare clients on regulatory compliance issues and fraud and abuse laws. I also counsel clients on government investigations and internal audits, self-disclosures, and the development and evaluation of effective compliance programs, along with another broad range of regulatory compliance issues. And I previously served as senior counsel at the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Counsel to the Inspector General for 5 years prior to joining private practice. I am currently the vice chair of AHLA's Young Professional Council. I've been a member of AHLA for several years and involved in several activities at AHLA, including an internship during law school, and I've been on the YPC for 3 years now. So I'd like to just take a moment to discuss the format for today's call. Like I said, we've collected questions from various young professional members of AHLA and compiled some of those questions into the presentation, and I will ask those questions to our panelists. We have 3 panelists today, and they will chime in and give their thoughts on each of those questions. And then at the end of the call, we're going to leave about 15 to 30 minutes for opening up to questions to the audience. And now I'm going to turn it over to the speakers to introduce themselves: David Cade, Karen Palmersheim, and Jeff Wurzburg.
Okay, hi, this is David Cade. I'm currently the CEO of the American Health Lawyers Association. Prior to this position, I had a short stint in private practice, but most of my years of practice was with the Department of Health and Human Services. And in that capacity, since I was there for about 28 years, I actually had a chance to touch almost every program associated with health and human services. One of the key things that I'll just note, and I think it's perhaps apt for this call, is for several years during my tenure there, I left the practice of law and was a policy wonk, which I enjoyed thoroughly. So as I say, as we get into this later in the presentation, we'll get a chance to talk about other ways to use your legal skills and training, and that there is a fluidity of policy wonkism, legal practice, that if you're interested in, I hope that you will find a safe and comfortable pathway there. Thank you.
So I'll go next. This is Karen Palmersheim. I am in-house counsel for Cigna. I've been with Cigna about 3 years, and I have a very varied practice. I help Cigna with corporate work, regulatory work, network contracting, all sorts of things. It's a wide variety. And prior to that, I actually did litigation for over 20 years, and I was a partner at Lock Lord. And the litigation that I focused on, especially after the beginning of my career, was in healthcare. So I transitioned from a litigation attorney to a corporate attorney for Cigna. So I'll turn it over to Jeff next.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Wurzburg. I'm a counsel at Norton Rose Fulbright, and I'm a part of our healthcare practice group. My practice focuses primarily on federal health care policies, so Medicare, Medicaid policies, which obviously that encompasses states as well, along with any sort of federal health care policy advice generally, any sort of value-based reimbursement model, contracting. I do a lot of advising on that as well. Similar to David, although I didn't have as much time at the agency as he did, I spent several years at AHHS in the Office of the General Counsel, which is a time period that I'm extremely fond of, and per David's hope, I hope we get a chance to talk about that as well. And prior to that, I actually had I won't even say a mid-career change. It was really an early career change. I spent several years initially working on Capitol Hill, then in private practice, and then at the United States Department of Defense in their Office of the General Counsel before I came to healthcare law. And I've been involved with the AHLA actually since I became interested in health law. I early on received advice that if you wanted to transition into health law, AHLA was an organization that you need to be a part of. And I attended the annual meeting while I was still at the Department of Defense one summer, and from that, I really think that it helped to launch my transition. So, again, looking forward to our discussion today.
All right. Well, thank you to all the speakers for your introductions and giving us a little bit of your background in healthcare law. Without further ado, I think we'll launch into the panel questions that we received from some of the young professionals, and I'll start with the first question, and then turn it over to the panelists to address these questions. So our first question: what are the top 3 trends you are seeing in the health law space right now? And are there areas of health law that you would consider areas of rapid growth potential in the next 5 to 10 years? So, Jeff, why don't you lead us off?
Sure. So in terms of trends, there's a couple that immediately come to mind. First and foremost, technology, tech in healthcare, the way that we're going to deliver healthcare in the future is changing at a very, very rapid pace. I was just reading about a fascinating company a couple weeks ago. CNBC had an article about a company called 98.6, and it's numbers, numerical 98, points spelled out, and then 6, numerical. And they have direct messaging with physicians, but about 50% of that is controlled by bots. So when you come to the website, let's say it's 3 in the morning, you've got a headache that won't go away, a bot is going to ask you a bunch of questions, collect that information, and then direct you to the correct type of physician. And they're also working with companies and in contracting with employers, including Seattle Children's Hospital is one of their clients. And they have about a 6% uptake, which is phenomenal. Just to give you a comparison, telehealth, typically you're going to get about a 2% uptake. So people seem to really like this. And just thinking about the dynamics involved in that and all the legal issues, you can see how as we transition the way that we receive care in this country, there's going to be a lot of interesting legal issues coming from that. Along with that, privacy and security will remain a huge issue that clients need advice on. Threats are always changing. Cyber threats are real and they're significant. If you haven't been hacked, you probably already have been, but you're certainly going to have some sort of cyber intrusion at some point. And so that's something that healthcare companies are going to have to continue to deal with and have real challenges with. Think about it. If a hospital needs to go offline for several hours, think about what that means for patient care in an era where everything is connected. Finally, reimbursement. You will always need good reimbursement attorneys. And that may not sound like a trend, but it is in the sense that the way that we pay for care is constantly changing. And so we're going to need good reimbursement lawyers who can advise all players in the healthcare community how they're actually going to get paid. And I think to all those really go to areas of rapid growth potential. I'll just note that our transaction folks are always very busy, and that may change as to which way those transactions are going. Perhaps it's systems acquiring physician practices. Perhaps next we'll go through another trend where physician practices are leaving and going back out on their own. So that tends to always be a good area. And then fraud and abuse. Fraud and abuse, there's always going to be work there as the government gets smarter and savvier in being able to detect potential fraudulent schemes. Work there is likely to continue.
Great, thanks, Jeff. David or Karen, do you have anything to add on this question?
I'd like to add a few to the top three. I do think compliance writ large in a very heavily regulated industry, it will always be regulated for all the things that he said, regulated because there's fraud in the system, regulated because there's money in the system, regulated because there's care in the system. All that under that umbrella suggests to me that, a hot area is compliance, and there's a legal side of that and a non-legal side of that, and I think that's a hot area. Reimbursement, absolutely right. From a federal point of view, from a payer point of view, it's pay reform. I don't think anyone has yet figured out how to pay, so we will constantly be fiddling with this, tweaking here and there, trying to figure it out. So in the near future, that's critical. I would add, who's the provider? That is changing daily on who is providing care and how we have access to care. And then the last thing, the trend, not so much in health law, but a trend in law is technology there too. The efficiency tools that are coming with artificial intelligence, I think, is also going to be a game changer in how you as practitioners use these tools to be more efficient and effective in what you do, and how your clients are using these tools, which may also diminish the reliance on lawyers in a traditional way. And so I think I would add those to the bucket.
All right, great. Thanks, David. So we'll move on to the second question. Some academics don't consider health law to be a defined area of practice because it encompasses so many different areas of expertise. With this in mind, can you all discuss how you define health law and what you consider to be a healthcare lawyer? And as a sub-question, how do you see these definitions changing over the next 10 years? David, do you want to take the lead on this question?
I'll jump in first. And as I said in the intro and in the bio, I spent most of my career with the Department of Health and Human Services. And in that capacity, I had a chance to touch all the programs, and I underscore health and human services. And prior to that, in law school, I was involved in the healthcare clinic, and I had patients who were institutionalized at the time. And in the 80s, it was a major push to deinstitutionalize all of the big warehouse systems that had existed for decades in this country. So for me, I always came to healthcare with a very, very, very large palette. If you're involved in health and human services with patients from birth to death, to me, that's healthcare. Now, I admit there are those who worked with me, for me, if you will, in the food and drug bar. And many of them did not, to this day, do not think they are health lawyers or healthcare practitioners. They're a foods lawyer, they're a device, they're a manufacturer. To me, if it deals with patients, it's healthcare, to and including labor and employment. If it deals with healthcare and the provision of healthcare services, it's health law. And so I get it, and I've talked to academics, and I still talk to them. I engaged with them just last week. I have a huge palette, and I think people are seeing that more. And my big argument is when you talk about the care continuum and we talk about prevention, and now this country is seeing prevention as a way of changing our culture from break-fix medicine. We're always going to have that because people will sort of ebb and flow in and out of a care continuum. But we are really patients 365 days a year from the day we're born. We have episodes of intense care, but hopefully most of the time, and as we improve on prevention, a period of calm. But we are always patients. That philosophy, picked up from other countries and with the research, is becoming more in vogue. And so for me, I see more and more healthcare delivery systems, research designed to keep us healthy, which means the bucket of those activities that fall into the health care bucket, and therefore the health law bucket, gets larger and larger and larger. Wearable devices, people that are tracking, their exercise, where normally we didn't consider that to be within that umbrella. It is. Then there's data, and there's the collection of data and the protection of data. I think in this industry, because it is so dynamic, it's huge and ever growing as hospitals and health systems, insurers and payers and providers continue to expand what they do away from break-fix medicine. And then for me, the practice of law gets brought into all of that. And if it's not in now, it will be in. Some of you in your own practices might have had questions about wearable devices, even from an FDA point of view. Is it a device or is it not a device? And there's a lot that relates to the First Amendment about the promotion and free speech, about access to meds and devices. So anything and everything that touches the patient, that touches the body, to me, fits in that bucket. So I just see greater expanse over the next few years. And I would say for all the practitioners on the line, follow the patient in addition to following the money. But where the patients go and how they navigate through all the disruptions that exist in healthcare is food and fodder for a health law practitioner.
And Jeff or Karen, do you have any additional thoughts?
I don't, other than I agree with David. It is very fuzzy because it is broad. And you may think that you're an employment lawyer, but once you have to determine if a physician should be deemed an independent contractor or an employee, you have to kind of know what their role is. I mean, it all gets very intertwined, and it does get very fuzzy.
Yeah, and I'll just note the social determinants of health, to David's point. Is becoming more and more focused. It's one area that I'm personally very fascinated in, and that goes to the idea of cradle to grave. And just go to the HHS website and look at everything under the sun that agency does that touches health, because that's the mission. And again, to David's well taken point, health touches everything. It's a very large tent.
Yeah, absolutely. Very expansive definition of health law. So we'll move to the next question. Thank you, guys. Next question is, if I were a new associate, what is one avenue I should pursue in terms of excelling in business development? So we're switching gears a little bit here, and Karen, why don't you start us off on this question?
Sure, thank you. I actually feel very passionate about this issue because I've seen people get into trouble in terms of not working on business development early enough. So many times somebody will join, like especially a big firm, and they'll say, oh, you don't have to worry about business development. We've got plenty of work. You just need to work on being a good lawyer. And it is true, there's a lot you have to work on when you're a young lawyer in terms of learning the skill. But I do think it's important to also think about business development, because you can't wait until you make partner and then realize, oh, I don't know how to do this. I don't have any connections and I don't have any business. You're not going to stay partner for very long if you haven't been developing that. And the advice that I would give is anyone is to become an expert in one or more things. And because people want to refer business to the fellow experts in their firm, or people want to go to a lawyer that is an expert. And if you've written on something, done webinars, spoken, made it clear that you're giving advice on a particular topic, you show that you're an expert and people will come to you. So what I would suggest is anytime you can, grab the opportunity to write, do an e-alert for your firm, join AHLA and do e-alerts, and just get your name associated with different topics. I think that's really important. And the other thing is just to also just get involved in terms of organizations like AHLA, put your hand up for leadership positions, start building your network. But I really think focusing on expertise and showing that you're an expert is really helpful to getting business down in the future.
Great. Thanks, Karen. Jeff or David, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I'll just add that I am a big believer that 90% of life is showing up. It's really important, to Karen's point, to get engaged, to raise your hand, to do things, to be seen. And that can be a real area of discomfort for people. And you just have to kind of push yourself a little bit, because so much of it really is who you know. And I don't mean that in a kind of sleazy, greasing hands kind of way. I mean that in the sense of people need to know and trust and respect you. And if you're not out there meeting people and showing them what you know, they're not going to think of you when that work comes in the door that they need to find the right lawyer for. So start early, start often, and make it an important point, no matter what type of practice you're in, because you never know where life is going to take you.
Yeah, hi, this is David. I totally agree, and I would say maintain an inquisitive mind. They say, if you don't ask, you don't get. And if your philosophy or practice is to wait for folks to invite you in, you may not get that invitation. They sometimes come, but they sometimes don't. So ask. Folks can always say no, but I think it's important to have the strength enough to ask, what's going on? Can I help? I'd like to be a part of this. Showing that inquisitive mind, I think, helps a lot.
Yeah, and just from my perspective, to add a little bit of a young professional perspective to this question, I've really found that attending networking opportunities that AHLA provides for everyone at in-person conferences, different times throughout the year, just like Jeff mentioned, showing up is half the battle, and you never know who you're going to meet. Shake hands with, you get various opportunities to contribute to, different written publications, networking, and put your name out there and kind of meet and greet a lot of the other experienced healthcare attorneys that are experts in their field, as part of these great networking opportunities. So with that, we'll move to the next question. Millennials are often blamed for a lot, including the death of dinner dates and golf, and are often portrayed as being less loyal and resistant to the 9-to-5 workday. This question comes from someone with a sense of humor. How do I overcome the stigma associated with being a young professional or millennial? Jeff, do you want to handle this one?
Sure, yeah, I'd be glad to. I actually straddle the fence in terms of where I fall as to whether or not I'm a millennial. But because I look young, I'm often accused of being a millennial, not to in any way insinuate that that's a derogatory term. But to David's point, I think one of the best things you can do is have an inquisitive mind. Put your head down, work hard, volunteer, find good mentors who you can work alongside and learn from. But along with that is the notion that millennials have so much to offer. In my experience, they tend to be very idealistic. They're they have incredible backgrounds, have often done very interesting things that might be outside of the traditional path that our field has had. And so there has to be a give and take in that sense. I think that on the one hand, yes, millennials also need to, in some ways, conform and recognize that there is still a hierarchy in terms of your career path, but there also needs to be flexibility to incorporate the values and many beneficial traits that the millennial generation is bringing to the table. And the last point that I'd make is 2 points, I guess, just to use old cliches. I mean, the first is that first impressions really do last a lifetime. They're very, very hard to overcome. You really have to work hard if you get off on the wrong foot. And the second is respect still does have to be earned. And oftentimes that is achieved by working hard, having an inquisitive mind, and showing up and showing that you're there for the right reasons.
Great, thanks, Jeff. Karen, do you want to chime in on this question as well?
Yeah, sure. As Jeff said, millennials do have a lot of great stereotypical traits as well, and I think that the focus should be on those versus the negative part. For example, you've heard, the stereotype, millennials constantly need validation and feedback. But, if you're in an interview, for example, portray yourself as, hey, I'm really responsive to feedback, spin the good part of it, computer skills, the fact that you're optimistic, charitable, focus on the good traits. The other thing is, I would also just be cognizant of who your audience is, because keep in mind that every generation has different ways of communicating and different things that are important. And I'm just going to go back to an interview, for example. If you are a millennial and you really do want to know about work-life balance, for example, or, flex time or work at home or whatever, those might be better questions to ask, the younger associate that you're interviewing with versus the baby boomer that you're interviewing with. And we all just have to be aware of the fact that that we work differently and we have different values every generation. And again, of course, these are just stereotypes, but as a group, people see things different. And I think it's helpful to just be aware of that when you're interacting with others.
Great, thanks. So we'll move to the next question. Is it possible to go in-house directly out of law school? And if so, would there be any downsides, or do you think it would hurt one's career trajectory down the line? And Karen, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Sure. Since I'm in-house, I can share with you that from my perspective, the in-house jobs for younger attorneys tend to be more narrow in focus. Like we'll hire somebody just to be the HIPAA lawyer or the privacy lawyer, or just to do a certain area of Medicare compliance or pharmacy. So I personally am grateful for the fact that I went in-house after a very long legal career, because it got me more of a generalist job. I kind of serve as a general counsel in my little area of the business, and that leads me to be able to do everything, work on contract issues and patient issues and employment issues, and to me that's much more gratifying. But I will say that the attorneys that we have hired that are like brand new attorneys that have grown up through Cigna also are extremely valuable resources. So while your job may start out very narrow, you don't necessarily have to stay there, and they can actually be great people because they've been with the company for 30 years. So I think you could go either way. There's pros and cons both ways. I'm just happy that I waited because I love my job now, and I don't know that I would have loved the first job I might have gotten in-house.
Yeah, hi, this is David. I totally echo Karen. It cuts both ways. I've known folks like Karen who've gone, as she said, have gone straight in. I would say, though, the places I've seen where it's been rocky is if you go straight from law school and you're not into a system where you are one of many, but you are the only one. To me, that's like hanging out your shingle right upon graduation, and that can be scary. And so, as folks said earlier, you need a network. The shameless plug, AHLA can help you form a network. But if you happen to, want to slide in, or you get that opportunity, in a local hospital or health system, and you're the only one, please, please, please work hard locally and even nationally to establish a network, because the questions will come in a variety of areas, and if you haven't been trained in all the areas, it'll be hard to issue spot. And it's always, in-house to me it was one of the most fast-paced operations that there are. It really is, I think Karen would agree, a 24/7 operation. So I agree, I can go both ways. I think a little experience is helpful, but you definitely can be successful if that's your first gig out of law school.
Okay, great. We'll move to the next question, and David, you can take the lead on this one, and then the others can chime in if they have any additional thoughts. But the question is, what are some examples of non-traditional positions that health law attorneys may be able to pursue, including positions that are not true attorney positions?
Okay, thank you. First off, as a practical matter, I'll just simply say a law school education to me is helpful. And if you're in the healthcare, health law arena, having a specialty in health law is even better. But I have always found the training at a law school in the areas of writing and communication and critical thinking to be extremely valuable, whether you practice law or not, or practice law in the traditional area or not. I think those are transferable skills that enhance anything and everything you do. As for me, any profession that you engage in, any job that you have, it's about communicating. And it's sharing what you know. And part of communication is listening to what the issues are and the problems are and the challenges are, and using that critical thinking skill, the analytical framework that you get in law school, to me, again, allows you to be successful in anything you do. So when you transition that to our arena, the health care arena, the health law arena, as I said, I see tremendous opportunities. I have seen them. I still see them in the area of policy. During my tenure at HHS, when I would be interviewing new law grads or even folks early in their career, one of the critical things is, do you want to truly practice law, or do you want to engage in policy? There can oftentimes be a tension. A lawyer needs to understand his or her role, and it is not policy development. But I definitely see great opportunities for folks to engage on the policy side. Again, that skill set that I talked about is highly coveted by policy officials. When I left the practice of law and I was a policy official, I had two special assistants. Both of them happened to have law degrees, and the knock on David was, he only hires people with law degrees. That wasn't true. But because my two special assistants had law degrees, the rumor was out there. But my point was, I liked the skill set. One of them never practiced in the traditional sense and went directly from law school into policy. Another one had some practical experience in a health system, and then transitioned to the government and was on my staff. So my point is, policy officials, those who are interpreting the statutes and writing policy or developing and writing regulations, highly covet the legal skill set, and those involved in healthcare highly covet those with law degrees. You've got some former HHS folks on the line. There are lots of people hired outside of the general counsel's office, and they are using their law degrees optimally in advancing and developing the agency's policy. So I would definitely think for government, for associations, the business side of healthcare, policy is an opportunity for that area. Compliance, as I said earlier, a growing field. It's always going to be here because we're so heavily regulated. Folks engaged in consulting, again, non-traditional, but still using that skill set on the business side, highly coveted, because you're able to communicate effectively. You're not perhaps practicing law, but you're interpreting statutes and regs. You're helping the client develop policy. I see tremendous opportunities there. As I said, I just put a big umbrella around compliance. It probably didn't have a name, when I was in school at the time, but it was always a theme. And now that it has a name, it will continue to grow. And it is outside of the health law arena into the health system delivery system with clinical compliance as well as regulatory compliance, as well as anything and everything compliance. And then the tech field. I will say this is not my bailiwick, and the people who do the law and the technology piece are scary folks. But in today's world of how we collect data, how we share data, how we interpret it, it all has that tech theme and integrated with the law, whether it's breach and cyber, you name it. So working in that side, whether you're practicing law or not, I think is huge. And the other thing too, and it was true 30 years ago, to practice in the traditional sense, and if people mean by that, it is a law practice, big law. Those opportunities are may not be so readily available, but there's plenty of opportunities in that, to use that and advance that law degree. And so my only caveat for the new law grads is if you want to practice in the traditional sense, you want to be in a general counsel office, but the job opportunities that are first available to you are on policy, and you need to eat, you need to take it, because that experience will help you. My caveat, though, is do not spend a lot of time on policy if that's your first job to be able to transition into law. I would say take the job, gain the experience, and simultaneously work to get the legal position, whether it's in-house or government or wherever, because the longer you stay in policy while you become develop a high degree of skill and knowledge, it's harder to transition into law than the other way around. So if you go to law first right after graduation and you want to go into policy, I've always found it's easier to segue into policy. And I think folks on the line probably have had that experience and know folks who have that experience. Once you're a lawyer and you're developing the relationship in the context with your clients or beyond, the skill set you gain is the skill set you gain. Your experiences. It's easier to transition into policy and then back again. So those are my quick thoughts.
Great, thanks,
This
David.
is Karen. I just want to add one thing because I think this is important and something that I learned, and it's just advice I want to share with you, especially any of you that are starting out or haven't yet gotten your first job. It never occurred to me when I was looking for a job, that first law job, to go work for a regulator. But I will tell you that as I got into the legal field, I found that those that started their career working for the regulator, the Department of Insurance, the Department of Managed Health Care, CMS, whatever, you learn the insides of something that's very important. And the people that had that experience were treated like gold, and clients flocked to them because they had the inside scoop. So just think about that. It doesn't pay as much, so it's always good, maybe for that first job. But I think the experience and the cachet associated with having that regulator experience can be extremely valuable, especially for business development in the future.
Yeah, Karen, I'll echo that. Having started my legal career at OIG in the Office of Counsel to the Inspector General, knowing the insides of those regulatory laws and statutes and how the government investigates and those enforcement actions brought by OIG has been experience that is highly sought after by clients and law firms. So it definitely has been a great experience that is highly marketable to transition to the private sector if you do end up starting your career working for a regulator. So with that, we'll transition to the next question. And this one is for Jeff to take the lead, and then others can chime in. But Jeff, what are some examples of specialized health law areas, and what type of people or businesses are clients for health law attorneys?
So just to echo, this will be kind of a short answer because we've touched on a lot of this already. But almost anything these days can be a potential client in the healthcare space. I mean, there are the traditional areas of reimbursement, regulatory, fraud and abuse, litigation, transactional, managed care, food, drug, and device, which to David's point earlier, I mean, they often kind of consider themselves their own area, but they're really not, because the interaction between food, drugs, and devices and everyday healthcare is becoming more and more integrated. And stemming from that, then, who are the typical clients? Well, there's the obvious, hospitals, physician practices, payers, accountable care organizations, behavioral health entities. But then you're going to get all sorts of other related and unrelated clients. For instance, we have private equity clients that are now entering the healthcare space and looking to be on the buyer side of deals for healthcare entities. And those are fascinating clients because oftentimes they may not appreciate a lot of the legal nuances involved, or they may not really understand how some of healthcare works. And it's fast-paced, and there's a lot of pressure because they move quickly. Grocery stores, lots of them have in-house clinics. I mean, look at all the vertical integration in healthcare. Thinking Aetna and CVS. All the different ties now between healthcare entities and what have traditionally not been healthcare entities, and you can see that almost any business in some ways can be a healthcare client. You could have fill-in-the-blank company. They obviously are an employer. They have healthcare benefits. Well, now you're advising them on benefits and how they're interacting with managed care companies or third-party administrators. So that's just a long way of saying one of the interesting and rewarding parts of working in healthcare is that you can have a wide variety of types of clients, even if you are highly specialized.
Great, thank you. Karen or David, do you have anything to add to that? I think we've covered that a little bit in previous questions, so we'll move on to the next question. What is the most challenging aspect of practice as a health law attorney? And Karen, do you want to take the lead on this question?
Sure, and maybe part of the reason for my answer is based on my background. I started off doing insurance, and then I did everything, real estate and patent and employment, all kinds of litigation. So transitioning to healthcare, the biggest challenge for me was learning it. I remember hearing all those acronyms and being completely overwhelmed. I think it's such an expansive area, and it's very intimidating. And I know I was intimidated, but you just kind of have to keep learning as much as you can. You can't just go to work and do your work. You constantly have to be opening up that article, looking at that new thing, being curious about the new case. There's lots of different websites you can join for new developments, but you really need to just be willing to grow and learn. But to me, that's the hardest. Like when the Affordable Care Act came out, just trying to get your arms around what all that was about. And just because it's such a very, very complicated area.
I would add that, Karen is totally right. And I think as a result of everything she said, it's highly regulated, it's ever changing, it's hard for some to remain current. I don't want to throw my other industries under the bus, but you can imagine that in some industries that are not ever changing, are not as highly regulated, and even some that are regulated, when it doesn't change that much, yes, you can be an expert, but it's the same. There's not much variety. It doesn't change. And for some, that's great. For others, that might be kind of boring. But I do think it's hard to stay up and current, which I think is one of the reasons that it's such a vibrant practice.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in to add that, to their point, that's one of the reasons the AHLA is such a wonderful organization. I mean, just the morning email with all the top stories, that's a great way to just stay abreast during the week of, okay, here are some of the big stories, knowing that maybe you're not going to have time until the weekend to circle back and really dig in. And also the archives, being able to search those. I use that all the time when there's an issue that I have questions about because someone did a webinar or someone wrote an article or presented it at one of the AHLA's conferences. And one of the challenges as well is, and this goes back to actually relationship building, but trusting yourself enough to say, okay, this isn't an area I know, but I have a good enough relationship with you that you know that I'm being honest and you can trust my referral, that I'm going to refer it out to someone else. Because that's the one of the big pitfalls in health law is it is so vast. You don't want to get out of your comfort area to an extent where you're putting your client at risk. And that can be a real challenge for folks, is being humble enough to say, I'm not your person here.
Yeah, great answers. Thanks, everyone, for pitching in there. And we'll move to the next question. Did you strategically pursue a career in health law, or did you end up in this area of practice due to an employer's needs or other circumstances? And Jeff, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So I actually have an interesting path in that I was not interested in health law. In fact, my father was an HMO executive when I was a kid, and I always swore I was not going to get into healthcare at all. And I wanted to be a litigator, and I was for a while. And then I had a family member fall ill, and I became very interested in the fact that the care we receive is actually very much dictated by the law. I ordered a textbook off Amazon. My wife still makes fun of me to this day about that. And I would read it in the mornings before I'd go into the office. And I said, wow, I think this is actually really what I want to do. And so in the evenings, I went up to American University's law school, and I got an LLM in health law and policy. And this is while I was at the Department of Defense. And this was also, it just so happened that it coincided with the time of the Affordable Care Act being passed. And I happened to apply. I applied for, Cade will get a laugh out of this, but I applied for a lot of jobs at HHS over those years. And Don Parker, who was in the general counsel in the CMS division, emailed me, and I really thought the email was to be like, we have your resume on file. Please don't submit it anymore. We'll call you if we need you. But he invited me in for an interview, and I met with Barb Fisher, who is still at the CMS division. And she, to this day, says that she took a chance on me because she could tell how passionate I was about that. And I share that story merely to say that, you know, if you follow your passions in healthcare, you'll get to where you want to be. And it's just such a wonderful area of the law that be deliberate, but be passionate, and you'll end up where you should be.
Yeah, and that's a great path to a career in health law that, you know, from starting without a real focus in health law, but ending up pursuing it. And just to give kind of a different perspective, my path was really a focus on healthcare law from the beginning. And before I went to law school, I knew I wanted to focus on health law, and I basically chose my law school based on that school having, you know, one of the top health law programs in the country, and strategically took health law classes throughout law school, got the health law certificate that my law school offered, did a dual degree JD Master's in Health Administration to further focus on the healthcare industry. And all my internships throughout law school were healthcare focused, and for example, working at the Department of Justice in the healthcare fraud unit. And so that kind of spurred my interest in fraud and abuse. And from there, you know, my job search after law school really focused specifically on health law jobs, such as working at OIG. And that was a great, you know, first job right out of law school for a new healthcare attorney to work with a lot of experienced experts in the fraud and abuse arena, and really learn a lot from all those attorneys in that office. So it really started for me before law school, and ended up coming to fruition through a focused effort to concentrate on health law.
So this is Karen. I just want to add one thing. I already referenced the fact that I did other things before healthcare and switched over after years of litigation. And I just wanted to remind people that you can get into healthcare law even if you didn't initially start grooming yourself for that based on prior jobs or law school classes or whatnot. It is possible to make a transition, and I'll tell you that it's just all about learning and getting yourself up to speed. And I think one of the first things I did when I did join the healthcare litigation firm was sign up for the AHLA's Fundamentals of Healthcare Law. I strongly encourage everyone to go to that if you haven't already, if you're new to healthcare. It provides a really great overview of all the key areas. So I just wanted to add that.
Thanks, Karen. So with that, we'll move to our next question. This one is, what makes health law such a growing field even when other areas of the law are not thriving? David, do you want to start us off on this one?
I'll start out. We've said throughout, and I think perhaps if you end the day, you'll have a theme. Yes, it's highly regulated. Yes, it's always changing. Yes, it's complex. The other thing, though, that I see a lot in law schools is not every law school has a health law section. Some law schools don't even offer health law classes, although, you know, I'm seeing more and more pick up one, two. They're not the hotbeds. And yet, as I've said and others have said, healthcare is everywhere, and it's not going away. It's a very vibrant practice. I would argue that it's recession-proof because it involves people. And people need health care from cradle to grave. And everyone is a patient. We just ebb and flow, as I said earlier, through our peaks and valleys of that continuum of care as individuals. But it's always here. Yet there is a regional footprint in many of the law schools depending on industry. Oil and gas is dominant in certain parts of the country. It dominates some of the law schools. And when I, travel around and visit with some of the local law schools, I am seeing more and more healthcare creeping in. As I said, it may not be a major focus, but it's creeping in. And there was a recent law school I worked with, and the students themselves are working to bring health law in the dominance of oil and gas. And so I still have to say it is happening because healthcare is a big deal in every state, in every region, in every corner of this country. The dominant issues may change, but it's always here. And when you overlay some of our recent issues that are, highly in the news, the opioid crisis, it's another example of healthcare everywhere. It's a dominant issue in the coal belt and in many other areas that have been hit with recessions and related to certain industries. Healthcare is always there. So for me, like I said, I take the big picture. If people are involved, it's healthcare. And people are everywhere. So all the issues we talked about, the integrated system, who's a provider, how is care delivered, telemedicine, cyber, payment rates, you name it, it touches every jurisdiction because people are everywhere. So I take the long view and invite you to think about it as well, that it is a growing field, it is ever present. What is changing is the mix of the lawyer and the non-lawyer, the complementary teams that involve consultants and compliance officials and other professionals making up that team that is associated with the deals and how we put together the business side of healthcare, as well as the practical side, the delivery system. That is changing, which also adds to the complexity and sort of the richness of the industry, which also then creates the opportunity for lawyers and law practitioners to stay engaged. So for me, and I admit I'm a homer, I think it is probably the most vibrant part of our industry.
Great, thanks, David. Karen or Jeff, anything to add to the question?
No, not from me.
All right, we can move on to the next question then. Please share your insights into whether authoring e-alerts and bulletins for AHLA practice groups and task forces is a valuable use of one's time as a young attorney. Sub-question, do you have any anecdotes or illustrations of how such projects contribute to professional development and or client development? David, do you want to take the lead on this question?
I'll take a stab at it, and I will qualify. I have a statement against interest because this is, yes, I'm here at AHLA. I've been active in AHLA. I want everybody to be active in AHLA. If you're involved in healthcare, if you're involved in health law, you're welcome here. Whether you're a practicing lawyer or not, you're welcome here. So that statement against interest comes because I recognize that opportunities here are limited. There's so many e-alerts. There's so many task force leadership opportunities. And yet I want everybody to take advantage of them. And I know you can't. The subtext of this question is writing and presenting valuable use of a young attorney's time? Yes, absolutely. Question number one is 100% yes. And the statement against interest is, if I don't have the capacity here, then yes, do it someplace else. I would not want to hear a story where someone says, well, I had all my chips in. I wanted to do an e-alert. I wasn't picked. I submitted a bulletin. I wasn't picked. I wrote a proposal to speak. I wasn't picked. And therefore, I'm sitting and I'll wait for the next cycle. That's not good enough. I want you to stay active. And so my statement against interest is, do it here, yes, and always keep coming back, but stay active somewhere. Because as we said earlier, it's about networking, meeting others, building your brand, honing your skills, developing your expertise. You need to do that everywhere. You need to communicate. You need to write. You need to do presentations. Those skills are the key cornerstone skills that will allow you to be successful in the practice of law and in anything else you do. Writing, presenting, it's communication. And so while it's important to obviously do the assignments that you get, those assignments may be pieces of a larger puzzle. So you might not be doing the presentation or the pitch. That writing is honed and part of something else. That's still valuable, pays the bills, you have to do that. But you need to hone those skills. You need the opportunity to stand in front of those, whether it's on a webinar or at a podium, and share. Those communication skills help in the one-on-one communication that you do with your clients every day. And likewise, the written communication. And some would say it's that the written communication is dead because all we do is email and text, and some of your clients like that. But what you put in and how you put it in matters. So it's, it may not be the long memos that we always used to do in the good old days before we had computers on our desk and the ability to text. The written communication is key, and those elements end up as part of the litigation. So I can't stress enough how important it is to find those outlets to write and present, to be comfortable standing in front of a crowd. And obviously, that may not be for everyone. The fine art may be more writing. The fine art may be smaller communication. But at the end of the day, you have to find outlets to hone that skill. And so I want to be the first love. And if I'm not, you have to find the outlets because it's important. Local bars offer an opportunity, giving back to schools, giving back to high schools and colleges, and working on the pipeline to share what you know and give back is critically important. So huge yes. And, as far as sort of examples go, you see it in the Connections magazine. You see it if you're a part of a practice group. There are opportunities for folks to give back, and it helps. We are always looking for opportunities for new voices. Sometimes we want to capture the young professional voice and showcase it. We are constantly urging our young professionals to submit, not only for opportunities to write, but also to speak. Everybody has a first time, and we want folks to keep themselves fresh and also to keep the association fresh. So we're always looking for those fresh voices.
Thanks, David. Karen, do you have anything to add on this one?
Well, I already kind of said it. I think it is very important to develop expertise and start building your resource or your resume. I would absolutely encourage people to do e-alerts and bulletins and do anything you can to get involved. I also found that once I started writing e-alerts for the PPMC practice group, it led to me being able to get a leadership position. So it's good for that reason as well. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, and I'd also like to, put a plug in for the, Young Professionals Council and the Young Professionals community on the AHLA Communities page. That's a great resource for the young professional members to tap into for opportunities to volunteer, to draft e-alerts. A lot of the practice groups are looking for volunteer authors, and it's a great opportunity for the young professionals because as the vice chair of the YPC, we post some of those opportunities on the Young Professionals community page to get interest from anyone who's one of the young professionals who's interested in authoring and working with other experienced healthcare attorneys in drafting these written materials or presentations to help market yourself. You get expand your knowledge base, get your name out there, and it's a great opportunity for some of the younger members to raise your hand, volunteer, and get involved. So just a plug to constantly check the Young Professional community page for additional volunteer opportunities. So we'll move on to our next question. How can a young lawyer or law school trained individual begin a career or transition into a health law position when it seems that most health law associate and other industry positions require a certain amount of previous industry-specific experience, usually at least 2 years in the health law field. Karen, do you want to handle this one?
Sure. If you happen to be in a firm that has anyone in your firm that practices healthcare, what I would suggest is to hound them and express an interest and offer to help with anything, even offer to help them with the article that they're doing on healthcare or whatever. But you just have to keep raising your hand, say that you're very, very interested, and ask for any way you can help, either with work or, related business development. Because it's always good to find somebody that you can associate with to kind of get your foot in the door. If you happen to be in litigation or an area where you have a chance to touch healthcare, there is an opportunity to expand based on that. I'll give you an example. If you had a litigation case involving a skilled nursing facility, maybe it's some malpractice action or something that involves the violation of a code, you're going to learn the regulations on that, and maybe you can take that knowledge and build on it, and maybe that's your little area of expertise that you write on is this area. I will tell you that I think it is very hard to start a healthcare law without anyone that's working with you. It's really complicated. So I think all you can really do is express an interest and try to develop an expertise as much as you can. And if they don't, so anyway, that's my basic advice on that.
Great, thanks, Karen. Jeff or David, do you guys have anything to chime in on?
I would say network too. I mean, you can network locally in your state bar, and you can network nationally, with AHLA. I think if you're trying to get in, being able to communicate not only within your own firm or organization, communicate your desire, but also network with other practitioners, letting them know you're interested is also helpful, and you can do that best, by attending a conference. As I said, locally or nationally, I think that always helps.
Great, thank you both. So we'll move on to the next question, and we might have covered some of this in previous responses, but we'll throw it out there anyways. Maybe it'll be a short answer, but this one is for David to lead, and others can chime in as well if necessary. But the question is, people always talk about how the healthcare industry and healthcare regulations are constantly changing, and yet at the same time, what's been old is often new again. Has that been your experience, and can you give us some examples that illustrate that truism from your experience?
Yes, it's true, and it's mostly okay. I will offer this as just a quick example. When I started my career at HHS, we were organized at the time where any new lawyer, you had a litigation deputy, so you did litigation, you had counsel and advice and regs. So I had 3 deputies. Basically, in the firm structure, it'd be 3 partners to take work from. And in that capacity, one case that I had dealt with a TEFRA reimbursement policy. And I was also doing payment policy counsel and advice and reg review and policy development in those areas. We had a case that was about 8 to 10 years old. And I will say the payment policy had changed. Nevertheless, we were in the trenches. This is the life of a litigator. I'm sure the litigators on the line can recall. By the time we ended up in court and we're advancing through the district court and the court of appeals, nobody in the agency cared about the policy. Why are we defending it? Well, because it was the right thing to do at the time. We were fighting the good fight, but it was an old policy. So while payment policies come and go, the litigation churn, we were fighting to defend a policy that had long since gone. It had changed, but they were still there. And so it's definitely true that what's old is new again. The policies and the nuances may drift away, but we are still sort of fighting the good fight. I will say, from a litigation point of view, it was frustrating that your client doesn't really care. But what we saw is a dynamic change in the healthcare arena. The other frustration as a litigator, and this happens rare in life, and in my current status now, it will never happen again, but I had a case that advanced to the Supreme Court. And the way we were structured at the time, it was my case at the district court, and it went through the Court of Appeals, and we were on our way to the Supreme Court. And honestly, I will say, we were going to win. I knew we were going to win. And as a young attorney working with the Solicitor General, this was amazing. But the story ended not so well. As we were doing the briefing for the case, the Solicitor General knew that the agency was working on changing the policy. So the General took the position, if you're going to change the policy, we're not going to waste the Supreme Court's time. So they twisted our arms, both arms behind our back, and said, you have to settle this case. So I imagine as a new attorney, as a young attorney, I wasn't new, I was a couple years in, this was crushing. Because just to sit at the counsel table in a Supreme Court case, I was just salivating with this opportunity. But lo and behold, what's old is new again. By the time the case had worked its way up to the Supreme Court, the agency had gone through many other iterations. We had evolved and changed the policy. The Supreme Court wasn't going to, they didn't want the Supreme Court to fiddle with it. And so we ended up advancing a regulation a little bit faster, settling the case. David was sad. But I think it just illustrates the pendulum constantly swings. And litigation is sometimes lagging far behind the nuances of change that happens through regulatory change and policy. And with the push of technology, things are moving faster, and the federal government just can't keep up. And so you're right, Jeff. I think, Patrick, that the change occurs. There's a lot going on in this industry. It can be kind of sad at times, but it is true. What's old is new again, and it's just shades of gray. We just keep changing. My mom used to say it's the same soup. You just keep stirring it, but we keep adding new spices to it, which makes it interesting. It's fun.
Great, thank you, David. Jeff, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. I'll just echo David's point. I have a memory of my father when he was the HMO executive. In '92, Clinton went before Congress and gave this very important speech about his health reform and what he was planning to do. And I remember that was in the days of VHS. My father had recorded it. He was watching it over and over again, taking notes, trying to figure out what it was going to mean for their company. And, a lot of those concepts that were embodied in Clinton's reform efforts in '92 are still around today. We're still considering them. Here we are talking about the idea of, expanding Medicare or Medicaid through perhaps a buy-in program or lowering the eligibility age. As David pointed out earlier, which was such an important point, we still haven't figured out how to pay for health care. And because of that, a lot of the ideas we're using today are the same ones, just tweaked a little bit. Capitated payments, that's been around for a long time. And similar to that, the idea of paying for value, we think we can do it better now because we have better inputs and better data, et cetera. But it's old concepts being reinvented. So that's all to say. What you learn today, tomorrow may not be in vogue, but may work out very well for you in a decade when those ideas are used again or tweaked.
Great, thank you both for your insights there. So we've got a few more questions, but wanted to just remind the audience that we will be opening up at the end for a little while to get questions from the audience. So if you do have questions, just keep those in your queue, and you will have an opportunity to ask some questions at the end here in a few minutes. So we will address the last few questions we have and then open it up. So next question is, what resources and tools do you use to keep up with the ever-changing rules? David, do you want to take the lead on this?
I'll just offer a couple of quick bullet points. One, our AHLA daily and weekly, I think, are great resources. We rely very heavily, obviously, on the volunteers to produce them. And it's a great way to stay current. The bulletins and the alerts that the practice groups generate, I can't underscore enough. As hot news breaking issues come along, the alerts are there. We're still pushing them out. But one of the things that makes us unique is to give a little bit more detail and analysis, and those would be the bulletins. The communities is a tool. It's a listserv where, and I tell this to the law students all the time, you're a law student. Membership is free. you should use this, and what great resources to have national experts available to you through the communities to bounce off questions and brainstorm and things like that. And, a tool that didn't exist back in my day as a law student. And on the humor side, I must say we do a monthly podcast on the humor side of health law, and it's cute. And I kind of like it because there are times when this stuff can just drive you crazy with the pressure of the day and the challenges that exist. So sometimes it's nice to take a step back and laugh. But definitely the weeklies and the dailies and the bulletins are the places I go with our resources.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Karen or Jeff, do you have anything to add?
I'll add that there are trade organizations besides AHLA. AHIP is one for insurance companies. Medical and hospital groups have organizations. So depending on whatever area you're in, I would strongly suggest that you get involved and get information from them. Another tip is regulators often have emails. Like I've signed up for the Department of Insurance and the California Department of Managed Health Care, and they will send out little alerts when things are happening. Another tip is law firms. There are some law firms that are very prolific and constantly publish things, and you can go on their websites and grab their PowerPoint or their article. I mean, they're sending them out to clients, but they often will put them on their websites. So once you identify, and feel free to contact me, I can share some of those names if you'd like, but once you identify them, you can go to their websites and get information as well.
Yeah, and along those lines, Karen, a lot of the government regulation and agencies have Twitter handles, and they push information out, real time to help keep you up to speed on when new rules are published and noteworthy developments. So I think we are reaching one of our last questions that we have gathered from the young professional members, and then after this we can open it up to the audience. So last question is, what advice would you give to new healthcare lawyers about how to tackle new and complicated issues and how to develop a depth and range of expertise to make themselves the most valuable to their clients? And I can open this up to just for all three panelists. If David, you want to start?
I think, I'll take a quick stab. I think folks, as said throughout, you've got to develop an area of expertise. You have to be inquisitive and know what's going on. The other thing I want to underscore is you really need to understand what your firm does in addition to what you do. Because another valuable asset or opportunity that you bring to the firm is an opportunity to just cross-sell the firm. I'm always amazed, whether it's a firm or a non-firm organization, when people don't know what the organization does. I think it's a failure to really understand and be able to promote what you offer. And even if you are not able to do the particular task, knowing who in your firm can and cross-selling is critically important and brings extra value to the firm or organization that you have. So I would just underscore developing, staying active, and marketing yourself.
And this is Karen. I mentioned this before, but be willing to give up your own time on the side to learn. Don't be afraid to tackle a new area you don't know. As a matter of fact, while I've been on this call, somebody emailed me about the Medicare Secondary Payer Act, and somebody asked me to go give a presentation to a client. I knew nothing about it, but I dug into it. I spent the summer learning all about it. I gave a presentation, and guess what? I got work. Not only did I get work out of it there, but it's continued to follow me, and now at Cigna I'm giving advice on it. So the point is, I knew nothing about it, but I learned it, and you can do that. So I'd encourage you to not be afraid of tackling things like that. And I would also just go to as many MCLEs, webinars, conferences as you can. And I don't want to repeat myself. I think we've said everything else. Find a mentor. Somebody mentioned that AHLA does have a mentoring program. I think that's helpful. And find any other mentors you can. Get as many as you can. You don't need just one, and they can be of help to you.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's actually a great lead-in for me. Be curious. find mentors. I'm at Norton Rose Fulbright today because of my AHLA mentor, a lawyer named Tom Dell. He's a reimbursement regulatory lawyer, and we would get together for coffee several times a year for many years. And just a quick pitch on government service. I loved my time in government and HHS. It was a wonderful place to work, and per the comments earlier, to learn how everything works and really see the inside of an agency was a fascinating experience. But when we had kids, I have 3-year-old twins, we wanted to be closer to family. I went to my mentor, and that's why we left DC, and that was why I left HHS. But finding the right fit was all because of this relationship that I had through the AHLA. And finally, in line with that, networking and relationships, it's like any other relationship. Oftentimes people just think that they're going to have one-off experience where they meet someone and that person gets them a job or gets them a client. And it's not like that. You have to invest in relationships and build that trust over time. And I think that's truly the best way to build relationships and over time expertise and trust to have a successful career.
Yeah, and with that, I'll echo Jeff's comments on networking. For me, networking was a very valuable part of my experience at AHLA during my law school internship, and all the great attorneys that were members of AHLA and gave their time to meet with interns and young professionals at coffees and lunches, and just taking advantage of those networking opportunities. Take them up on meeting for coffee, and they're happy to do it. I reached out to a lot of attorneys who made themselves available to me during my job search, had coffee with them, picked their brains, and ultimately it led to meeting with many higher ups in the government. The chief counsel to OIG met with me, Lou Morris, for coffee, which was one of my highlights of that summer. And you never know what it can lead to, and that ultimately landed at OIG. So networking is one of the biggest tips that I give to law students and young professionals looking to launch their career in health law. So with that was our last question that we have from our solicitation of questions. I think with that, I'll turn it over to the webinar staff to open this up to the audience for any additional questions that anyone has.
Thank you very much. So for our audience to ask questions, you can ask your questions directly over the phone. Please enter the phone queue by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. That will put you into the phone queue where you will be able to ask a question. Our operator will pull lines out one by one, let you know when your line is open, and you'll be able to ask your question directly to our speakers. Again, that is *1 to enter the phone queue. Phyllis, do we have any questions on the line so far?
At this time, there are no questions. I'm sorry, we do have a question from the line of Mojan Anari.
Hello. Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes.
Hi. This is Mojan Anari. I have been doing healthcare medical liability litigation for about 4 years now, and recently I've gained a lot of interest in switching over to transactional and compliance and regulatory work, and I actually did reach out to a partner of mine who does that and have been able to work with him, try to develop that skill. But I also do a lot of studying on the side, much like what Karen did, to just gain more knowledge and be able to speak on a lot of the subject matter. But I find that as a litigator, because I've been handling litigation of medical liability for a while, I can, when I'm presented with an issue, I can confidently speak on it and tackle it and handle it. But with healthcare compliance and regulatory work or traditional healthcare, I tend to lose confidence because I haven't actually done it in practice. I don't know if this makes sense to you guys, but how did you, even if I know about the subject matter, how do you guys, what do you guys recommend I do to be able to gain the confidence that I have in the litigation aspect and also kind of have the same amount of confidence in the compliance work or regulatory work, even if I haven't done that or haven't helped a client in a specific area of practice.
This is David. I kind of like Karen's comment a moment ago about diving in. And of course, if attending the fundamentals conference that we offer would help ground you, or the Transactions or Medicaid Medicare Institute, I would offer there's ways to get educated that might boost your confidence. I'm not sure it necessarily has to be hands-on, where you have to have a matter that you're working on, but just sort of listening, to your comment. What would it take for you to feel more confident? It may be greater familiarity with the subject matter, and that could be, as Karen said, diving in or coming to a conference or reading and getting that level of comfort with the subject matter. That might help you with your confidence.
Yeah, this is Patrick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Karen.
No, go ahead, Patrick. I'll speak after you.
I was just going to say, from my perspective, it's been helpful throughout my career, especially, in learning new areas, to ask for an opportunity to, shadow or sit in on partner-led calls or interactions with clients, or, just to be able to soak up what it is that the advice that they're giving to clients is. What does it sound like? How are they handling different matters? I know it's not always, billable time if you're, a younger associate and you're, the partner's handling the call, but it is a great learning opportunity. And I think it gives you, at least for me, it helped develop some confidence in what I was saying and how I was communicating in those matters to clients down the road.
Great.
And what I was going to add is a lot of healthcare compliance issues are not just about looking at the rule, but in having an appreciation or understanding of what regulators are doing with it and whether they're being enforced and how they're being interpreted. And that's where maybe lack of confidence can come about, because you're not really sure, well, I think this is what it says, but it's kind of hard to know. And it's tough. I mean, you got to learn to trust in yourself, and you will gain more confidence as time goes on and you do more of the work. But in the meantime, all I can really add is just to try to consult with others. Again, having a network is great, because if you're in the Medicare space and somebody else that's Medicare, you can call them up, and without revealing privileges, you could give them a hypothetical or ask them, their interpretation of a rule or how the regulators are viewing it and that kind of thing. There's also, and again, I know we keep going back to AHLA, but I'm sorry, it's just a great resource for young lawyers, for all lawyers actually. But, we have those listservs. I don't know, what do we call them, David, where you can ask a question, the communities?
Communities, yeah. That's right.
Yeah. It used to be, I used to refer to them as listservs, but you can ask a question about things and people will answer and they'll give you advice. So I would strongly encourage you to just reach out to other sources if you're unsure about a particular area and try to get somebody else's perspective.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Your next question comes from the line of Joseph Urano.
Hi, my name is Joseph, and I'm calling from UC Hastings. I'm really interested in an area of natural medicine and the law, and it's such a new area that I'm not sure where to get resources. So for many of us who are kind of looking toward the future and in areas that haven't been well explored, like, how do we sort of invent that wheel, or do we just analogize?
There are some hospitals and health systems that are looking at this. I'm trying to think of an easy way. I think you are very entrepreneurial, and I appreciate that. And I know in the Indian health arena, there's a lot more activity going on natural medicine. As I said, some hospitals, health systems, some insurers are in this space. it is new. You're right. I think it's hard to get a lot of good information on it. I'm going to check and see what we have available, and maybe we can push it back out on one of the communities. Maybe others have some ideas too.
Yeah, and this is Karen. I just Googled natural medicine, and I saw that there were some organizations that popped up. Like one says, "Welcome to the Natural Medicines Research Collaboration." I mean, since it is new and it's not, I don't think there's a whole lot of like law on it. I would at least learn what's going on and join any associations, or at least poke around and do as much as you can to learn on the internet. I think that would be at least a good first start.
Right. And you could write an article on whatever it is you learn, or
exactly. In fact, that would be a great article for AHLA,
I'll
right?
Take it. Yes, I will take it.
Yeah, that was going to be my advice. Was lean into it, and if there isn't a lot out there, get out there and write about it and make those opportunities for yourself.
Your next question comes from the line of Jessica Costeva.
Hello. Thank you very much for your guys' presentation today. I thought it was very informative. I was wondering if I could just get a little bit more detail about the question regarding somebody who went, in-house directly out of law school. Maybe what kind of experience would you hope to, add to that type of career to make sure that they don't damage their career trajectory down the line? Speaking from myself, I kind of came in and started working in-house at a major payer directly out of law school. I was wondering what sort of things you might look to see that person makes sure that they, continue to move upwards in their career, or other experiences or work opportunities that you might see that they would achieve.
So this is Karen. I was the one that addressed this earlier, and my advice to somebody in that situation would be to always look for new opportunities and not get yourself pigeonholed as you're only the HIPAA attorney or whatever the area is. Talk to your manager, tell them that you wanted, and look, find out what other people are doing in that health plan or wherever you're working. And if there's that ideal job that you'd really like, you really want to be the regional counsel or you really want to be the whatever, you should take any steps to move around to explore that. I mean, and I don't know where you work, but like at Cigna, we have opportunities to help each other out when somebody's away or sick leave, pregnancy or something like that. We have formal programs where you can say, I don't know anything about supply chain management law, but I really want to do that. And they actually let you do that for a bit so that you can learn that other area. And we also are very encouraging about growth. It's all about growth, and so that's kind of our philosophy. I hope your company has that as well, but if not, you should at least explore it and try to push that. And I think moving around and is a good way to not get stuck in just one position where you're only looked at as that particular, a lawyer with only that area of expertise.
Yeah, I totally agree with Karen, and I think that many organizations who don't think about development, I urge them to at least think about backing each other up. Many in-house operations can be thin, and you might be the HIPAA person, but then there's somebody else who's the transactions or real estate person or whatever. It would be good to have a practice, and I think the in-house clients would appreciate it, that when Johnny's not available, you go to Ben, so that there's a little bit of cross-fertilization. I think that could be very, very helpful, a way to learn a new discipline.
Yeah, and also keep in mind, just like you can volunteer at a law firm, you can volunteer in-house. If there's somebody that has your job that you like or that you'd like to do someday, say to that person, if you ever get busy, I have some capacity, I'd love to help you, I'd love to learn your area, let me help you. If you're away on vacation, let me take your emails. Again, raise your hand, and all you need is a little bit, and then suddenly people will look at you, as somebody that's capable of doing that role.
Okay. And do you think that there's any particular type of health law entity that might particularly benefit from somebody in-house at a major payer? or I guess if the opportunities weren't available at the location, is there a particular, I guess, you talked a little bit about the regulatory bodies, I think, and how that's something that can be very valuable to law firms and payers and insurers alike, but maybe, going the opposite direction if you had any insight on that.
I don't know. I'll defer that to you guys who have been at a regulator. What do you think about somebody with like health plan experience? If you were a health plan regulator, would that be helpful?
I say yes.
Me too.
Yeah, industry expertise is just as valuable as enforcement expertise. So and firms. I mean, I think everybody is playing in this area from their different perspective. And you have insider expertise that's valuable to a firm that's providing counsel and advice and doing deals for clients like yours, as well as from the regulated industry. So I think you have a marketable skill.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Again, if you would like to ask a question, please press star then the number 1. And we have a question from the line of Anthony Fanucci.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anthony, as you heard. I'm actually a 1L at Penn State Dickinson Law. Prior to law school, I just finished up pharmacy school, so I graduated last May from there. And pharmacy was not just an expensive piece of paper. It's something I want to maintain in a legal practice. So I'm really passionate about problems that patients and providers are facing. And I have to say that groups like AHLA have just been really incredible, especially the mentoring program. I'm really thankful for it. But my question is, I don't know if it's just because I've been in school so long and I'm, eager to contribute, but I want to start putting out just basic products or basic, articles or something that shows my passion and my interest in these topics. And I know that's challenging only having the legal education of a 1L, but I wanted to see if you either had recommendations for a medium, like whether it's a LinkedIn article or, a different medium to do that on, or a topic that you think is not so expansive that maybe, a law student early in the journey would be able to dive into.
Well, I will say it is hard for a 1L to do a lot of things in the legal world, to and including, getting internships and things like that. However, you're not just a 1L, the phrase you used. You have pharmacy experience, and I don't know, did you say you were practicing pharmacy, or did you transition from pharmacy school to law school?
So I did. So I finished pharmacy school in May. I do currently in law school practice as a community pharmacist, and then this summer I'll be taking a pause from practicing as a pharmacist I have an internship with the DEA.
Okay. Ooh. Anyway, my point is capitalize on your skills as you gain new skills. And so just the 1L, as I said, I don't like that phrase. It sort of minimizes where you are in your journey. You're a practicing pharmacist. And if you have an opportunity to write based on your experiences as a practicing pharmacist, understanding the challenges that exist at whatever level you are, I think there's a value there. And you have the added skill of a law student as you're learning more of the law that impacts the practice. It is, again, a highly regulated area, pharmacy, more highly regulated now as a result of the opioid crisis. Everybody is producing content in the opioid area. Maybe that touches you. Maybe PBM touches you. There's lots of things where you may have a perspective. So I would say lean to your strength, and I'd be happy to work with you. I don't know what outlets we may have that's readily available, but maybe there's something that we can do with that perspective as you matriculate through your legal career.
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate all that.
Your next question comes from the line of Joseph Stevens.
Hello. Thank you for this presentation and taking questions. I have a question. I went to law school and then I passed the bar and then went straight into an MHA program. I think someone was saying they did the same thing earlier. But I was just wondering, I've been in school for 5 years and I never practiced law. How can I leverage or sell that MHA to a firm or a healthcare organization that I want to practice law for?
Yeah, this is Patrick. I mentioned earlier that when I went through law school, I did a dual degree JD MHA. So that was part of our, it was a 4-year program, and so we did half, part-time MHA courses and part-time JD courses during our last, 3 years of law school. And so, as you learn, a baseline understanding of the healthcare industry and how healthcare entities operate from a business perspective. So I have, in my job search, marketed that as, having not only just the legal background, but also having a fundamental understanding of how healthcare entities work and operate, the intricacies of a hospital system, the billing and management components, everything from quality improvement to financials to patient continuum, quality of care. So I mean, I think I've used that to market my general interest in healthcare law from the outset of my education, and kind of bolstered my commitment to the healthcare field to potential employers by saying that I have also pursued an MHA, which provided me with additional skills and understanding of the healthcare industry that and use that to try to set me apart from other applicants and provide that edge. I don't know if any of the hopefully that helps answer some of the question, or if any of the other panelists have something to add.
Not on my end. Mm-hmm.
Your next question comes from the line of Sophia Ying.
Good afternoon, panelists, and thank you for taking the time to answer the questions. I have been licensed for over 10 years and practiced or litigated for half of that time. I'm currently in Houston and exploring the possibility of going back to school for an LLM, and I believe Jeff touched upon this because he went and received an LLM during the era of the Affordable Care Act, if I recall correctly. I'm just wondering if exploring the LLM program really propels you to the front of the line in terms of desirability to an employer, or is your experience, and related or unrelated, viewed upon in a better light as opposed to spending the time going back to school?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So the answer that I would have for that is I wouldn't say it propelled me to the front of the line. It did, however, add a credential that showed a seriousness, and that's really why I did it at the time. The legal market was not hot. This was 2009, 2010 when I started to get interested in the health law field. And so the advice I got was taking the time to show that I'm serious. In boom times, you can get someone to take a chance on you. And I truly feel that at the end of the day, that's what propelled me, was it got my foot in the door. And from there, I was able to show people that I was passionate. I made the joke about my former boss taking a chance on me. And it was the combination of my passion. I also had experience working at the Department of Defense and previously on kind of hot topics that were under the microscope. And so that showed that experience. And as you've noted, you have prior experience. So that combined with an LLM may be very helpful for you. The piece of advice I would give is use it as a platform. And if you do go back and get an LLM, network like crazy while you're doing that. Use that time to make the connections gain any sort of additional outside fresh experience you can, to write, etc., so that when you do get your foot in the door somewhere, a combination of your experience and the credential of the degree will hopefully make you competitive.
Right.
And this is Karen. I'm just going to add one thing. David, maybe you have the same perspective. My perspective is actually different. Although when I went to law school, it wasn't during that hard time. I understand what Patrick's talking about. The hiring was horrible. But I don't think it's the same situation today. And in weighing an LLM versus other things, I don't know. I don't know how helpful that is because I just don't know anyone that has an LLM. I never hear anyone talk about it. I never hear it. I mean, it's never been a consideration in anyone that I've ever interviewed, or it's just kind of like not on my radar. So I'm just telling you that for 25 years of practice, it hasn't been anything that I've seen be a great marker for somebody. So I'm just throwing that out there. David, what's your perspective on it?
Yeah, I'm closer to Karen. I say if it's your passion and you want the education, then go for it. But I don't think it's necessary. Most of the time, I always favor the experience. That transferable experience that you also have, that always mattered more to me than the LLM. And for that matter, an MHA or an MPH, because part of it is, what are you here to do? And is that extra degree going to help you do that job that I am seeking to fill better? But I agree with you. It is another credential. It's something that you own that will never be taken away. But in most of my hirings, I usually looked at the experience. You talk to 15 people, you're going to get 15 different answers.
Yep.
This has been really helpful. Thank you very much.
And at this time, there are no further questions.
Okay, great. Well, we really appreciate all the questions from the audience. Thank you to our panelists for fielding questions and their great insights. Again, I'd like to reiterate that, there are, if you have additional questions, there are resources definitely on the AHLA website. Ask a YP. If you go on the AHLA website, that's a great resource to get answers to any of your career development questions, signing up for a mentor like the panelists mentioned, checking posts on the YP community, Young Professionals community, or the YPC community, or if you have questions, you feel free to post on those communities, and someone from the Young Professional Council will reach out to you and help point you in the right direction, whether that's a mentorship or just fielding some of these basic career development questions. And then, as always, feel free to email any of the panelists from today that were on this call. And again, we really appreciate everyone's time for joining us this afternoon. And again, thank you to the panelists for a great discussion.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for your time. You may now disconnect.